Today, we return back to a case study from 5 years ago. There's good reason that we've waited 5 years to circle back and study the biotech industry. Well, we're going to do it today. This is a fascinating case study, and welcome to Power Charting. I'm your host, Bruce Fraser. First, an important announcement. Alexion is going to be giving a crypto market webinar using the Wyckoff method, and this will be actually tomorrow at TSAA-SF. This is a historic technical analysis education society. Everybody should be a member. Great content at TSAA-SF and phenomenal events coming up in the fall. So definitely check it out. And then also, here is Alessio's landing page at wyckoffanalytics.com, where there's a tremendous amount of free content, blogs that Alessio has written, and he just does exceptional work in the cryptocurrency area, and I think you're really going to like it. So even if you're not a cryptocurrency person, I think you're going to really enjoy his work. Okay, so let's get to it. Biotech Index IBB is our case study today, and it's going to be, I think, a very fascinating case study. There's a really good reason we've waited 5 years to return back to this area, which we'll see in a minute. Then we're going to look at some biotech stocks and finish with a discussion of the triple Qs. First, let's do a little review. This is the Wyckoff Reaccumulation schematic, something we've looked at numerous times in the past. What happens in reaccumulations, which is a very, very powerful Wyckoff concept, is that you have a really sharp uptrend that is ultimately climaxed and then goes into a range-bound condition with a buying climax, automatic reaction, range-bound condition, where stock goes from weak hands, traders that get on board who are very short-term oriented will shake out their long positions, and this stock will be absorbed by the longer-term composite operator oriented participants in the market. So here we can see that the volatility is being squeezed out of this reaccumulation structure. Finally, you can see this long grinding decline from resistance back down towards support, which is often referred to as a creek. A creek is a sign or evidence of absorption being near completion because the volatility just is significantly reduced, even though the market is declining back towards support. It can end in a spring or it can end in a last point of support, high or low, but in either case you get a jump, and a jump is a dramatic, sharp move in the direction of the primary trend as it pushes back up to the resistance area. And then something important happens, which is that you get a pause. And this pause occurs around the top, the resistance area, either on it or above it, preferably above it, but it happens both ways. And this tight area is referred to as a jump, and then a backup also can be referred as a sign of strength, but the backup will be very shallow, and then the uptrend resumes. This is referred to as phase D in Wyckoff terminology. You can read more about reaccumulation trading ranges by looking at the blog that's referenced on the bottom of this slide. Also, I think the week after there was also another reaccumulation blog article. So very important concept, and certainly one of my favorites is to study and participate in reaccumulation trading ranges. Okay, moving on. This is the IBB, Biotechnology ETF. This is a 5-box reversal point and figure chart. 5-box method point and figure is often thought of, or at least by me, as being akin to a monthly bar chart. It's not quite the same thing, but you use these to absorb or evaluate large amounts of data, long periods of time. Here you can see that we're looking at a cause that's been built over about 10 years. So this is from 2001 to 2010. And this whole area is an accumulation structure in the IBB. This accumulation structure builds a count. This count is substantial. It sets up a condition for an important rally, an important move that lasts multiple years. We're going to study that in a minute. So you can see that there is 29 columns of count times 5-box reversal method. We're using ATR scaling, which calculates to 0.71 points per box. And this gives us 102.95 points of count objective from a count line of 2485. So that tells us that there is huge potential. And this is in an ETF. It's not an individual stock, but an index of many stocks. And so this makes it even more significant. So with this in mind, let's move on and look at how this unfolded. Here is a chart. Let me get my drawing tool here. And here is a chart of, let's pick a good color, this area of accumulation, which we can't see the entire area because the chart just goes back to 2005. But there is an important uptrend that emerges after a sign of strength and then a backup. And the backup comes back, this right here, comes back to the area of the breakout. So you can see it's a pretty stiff reaction. And then an important uptrend begins. Well, look, here is the important backup where there's, after getting out of the accumulation area, it goes sideways and doesn't come back in. This is a really important event right here because this says that IBB is strongly held, has been absorbed, and no longer has supply present to push the price down, which was the case at this prior low. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not buying IBB earlier, possibly in the conclusion of the accumulation range. Let's look at relative strength. This is very important because here you can see in this yellow box that I've highlighted is an accumulation area that lasts 3 years. Now, the accumulation area shows that IBB is a market performer. It's not a market outperformer. It's not yet leadership. But once it gets into this area up here, the relative strength is confirmed. It's in an uptrend. It's above its moving average, and here it goes. So again, participation could occur as early as the conclusion of this accumulation range. Here's the count that we took on the 5-box prior, 116.44 up to 127.80, and you can see that this beautiful uptrend went onward from 2011 all the way up to 2015. There was a trend channel that was produced. Here you can see the anchor points for this. There's a steep one, and I'm also going to show you a longer term one in a minute. This became overbought at what we're calling preliminary supply. And then there was another throw over in 2015 and a second throw over in 2015, which was then sharply reacted. And the sharp reaction shows that there is supply present, and it comes right at the point of our point and figure charts being fulfilled. So now we have a reaccumulation structure, and this is exactly the reason that we have not really studied the biotech index for 5 years, is because we could see that it was going to be in a trading range, range bound for an extended period of time. We'll notice this beautiful rising uptrend in the relative strength, which is broken in 2015, confirmed down. It is now turned down. It's below, also price is below its trend channel. So it's reached up, touched it once from underneath, and then went down again. So a large trading range condition for multiple years. Well, notice what's happened. Also, just to keep in mind, this red arrow shows the underperformance of biotech, and we want to just stay away from these long-term relative strength underperformers because they're not yet in a position where they want to be leadership. We want to focus on leadership. I'd like to just show you the long-term trend channel, which is in purple here. And you can see these three adjacent lows all line up and produce a stride, a demand line and a stride that is seemingly not important because it jumps out of it and is accelerating higher. But look what happens here in 2020. At the conclusion, we think might be the conclusion of this reaccumulation area, it pulls back one time, IBB, to the demand line that is literally set up in 2011, and it comes down, touches this at an oversold condition on two levels, the support line and also the demand line. So you can see here that there's an important rally up from this, shows good support, two levels, and rallies up to resistance at two levels, which is the top of the channel and also the resistance area. Lastly, just have a close look at this buying climax peak and the importance of drawing these trend lines and channels because they are so useful. And even though this accelerated out and got way above this longer term channel, the channel, look at how the channel comes back into play. The overbought line basically holds up this rally phase in the trading range in IBB, attempts to come back in, rallies up underneath. These trend lines are amazing and you should just draw them over and over and over. And of course, StockCharts is just great for drawing trend lines. Also, here's the creek. Look at that. And notice the jump. So this long grinding decline that can't get back down to support, and then a very sharp rally. The sharp rally into the end of the year is the best rally that we can see going all the way back into the prior uptrend 6-7 years before. This is very encouraging, even though it doesn't get out of the trading range, and we're going to have a closer look at that as we go to the next slide. And here is the next slide with some more detail. We can look at the relative strength, but here you can see that there's also a trend line that can be drawn on these two secondary test lows back in 2016. And there's a great stride to this advance, two attempts to break at the support level and also on the demand line of this trend channel. Here's the creek. We've drawn the creek in here. Really beautiful jump. Volume is good. Goes up. We're going to call this a minor sign of strength back up to the top of this resistance here. And then this sharp decline, which was related to the COVID-19 drop. But in the case, this is really important, in the case of IBB, it goes exactly to support, slightly breaks this very long-term demand line that we had on the prior chart. It's two forms of important support here, and look at the relative strength. This is, like I said before, this is like X-ray vision for us. This is so useful because notice that in the decline in February, March, that IBB actually has a rising relative strength line through this whole period. And so this is really a sign of the internal strength in the IBB really shows up in this relative strength line, both in the fact that in the decline in this yellow box, it's rising while IBB and the market as a whole is declining. This suggests that IBB is declining less than the S&P 500 in this case. But also notice something very important is that the relative strength has turned up. It's turned up the long-term moving average. We have an arrow drawn here, which shows that after a very long period of underperformance and relative strength, that all of a sudden biotech appears to be in the emergence of important new leadership. This is what we want to see. So we have this 5-year reaccumulation trading range, which we talked about. We have a creek, we have a jump. We now have a rally up to the top of the resistance area, which we're calling a major sign of strength, which is a rally up to the top of this little internal trend channel. Major sign of strength has taken out the buying climax peak. Now what we want to see, because we have this just exceptionally good rally, which is the best rally that we have anywhere on this chart in terms of its just sheer power, is we have an opportunity to watch for whether or not this strength can continue up and out, or whether it pauses here in a backup, and we want to see the backup be shallow. So this shows that demand is good, supply has been absorbed, and biotech as a group is ready to have an emergence into an important uptrend. So now we look at this and we ask the question, is this a campaign candidate as a theme? So what we would do is turn to the point and figure analysis to see whether or not there is the potential for higher prices. So we can see here the count, initial count, which went 116.44, 127.80, and see how this particular count got within one box of the high end of the range. It threw over by one box, and then notice the supply that shows up in the automatic reaction. It's classic automatic reaction characteristics. So it pulls back a lot, sets up a range bound condition, and we draw resistance over the top at the buying climax, support on the automatic reaction, and then 5 years of reaccumulation, which we've just looked at. But let's take two counts. There are two segments that we're going to work with initially, and that is the segment in green, which is 15 columns, 3-box reversal, 2.5 point scaling, and this generates 112.5 points of potential. So here we are at the top of the range. We were talking about there being a shallow backup and a pause. We will watch for that, because the other thing that could happen, it's a very real possibility, is that when you get to the top of a trading range, it's got to go back to the bottom again. And so we're going to be watching extremely closely for how well IBB can stay up here, or whether or not it's going to have to return back into the range again. But if it stays here and keeps going, the green count takes us to 202.50, 207.50, a great first run from a count line of $95. So that's impressive. Then we have a larger count, a second segment, which goes up to 37 columns, goes up to 357.50, 372.50. Again, a great campaign characteristic. The third count, or third segment, that we would be looking at would be out here to the automatic reaction area. And I am going to leave that for you to count. If we can get up to these two count objectives, then we'll definitely circle back and be looking to extend our count even further. Okay, well that concludes the IBB portion of this, but you can see why we waited so long to come back and revisit the biotech index, because there's really was nothing going on that was important, because there wasn't relative strength, there wasn't an uptrend, there wasn't a cause built, but now there is. And so we will be looking for candidates. We can trade the biotech index, which is my preference because there are so many biotech stocks, but we also can look for best of breed. And let's take a few minutes and look at some of those and see whether or not we can get a sense for which of these biotechs is leading. Here we are in the industry group list in StockCharts.com. This is such a powerful tool, and so I just want to walk you through the biotech theme. Here we go to healthcare as a sector. We see biotech, and also we can make any number of different types of charts in the biotech space, but we want to see a list of the stocks. And so here we are looking at the individual stocks. We can sort them by their market cap, and you can see that there's just a huge number of public companies trading in the biotech space. And so this is what becomes sort of daunting, because the technologies and what each of them is doing is so different and unique. So looking at an index like the IBB, we want to focus on the large tech names, because they're the ones that are driving the index up or down. And so here we have them sorted by large cap and mid cap. So let's just have a look at some of these. What I like to do is I'll go in and I'll start with the large cap names. I want to see what's driving the index, what's driving the industry group. And so I will go through and look at these in order, and then identify the ones that seem to be best leadership. And we will do that here in just a second. The default chart that I use is the one that you're looking at right here. So this is Alexion. Alexion is one of the very large cap names. You can see that in Alexion, it's been in a downtrend. It's been weaker than the IBB on balance. And also note the relative strength has been in a downtrend. But here, all of a sudden, there's been a shakeout type move in 2020 and a very sharp reversal upwards. And this is encouraging for Alexion. And notice this is also coming with an attempt to turn up into a new relative strength uptrend. So this is Alexion. We want to look at it, but it is one of the, I would say, not leadership names, but it has some interesting characteristics. So let's just go on. Here is Regeneron, which I think is very interesting. Long-term downtrend in the relative strength, long-term downtrend in price, weekly chart, but notice the reversal and notice the sheer magnitude of the rally as it's pushed back up to the highs of 2015. So Regeneron appears to be one of the names that is driving the IBB and the industry group upward. And now you can see that this looks like a very large cause is potentially built in Regeneron. Here is a point and figure chart. You can see here that we did 3-box reversal, ATR scaling, and this count across here, which is really fascinating. If we just take a partial count, 9 columns across, it counts up 9 to 904. So it's very close to the climax. Look at this beautiful climax in 2015 up at 605. It's climbed up to that area. It's getting very close. Probably needs to do some kind of a backup. We'll see if it can stay, if it stays in or climbs out of this area. But there is a huge count potential, and we've only counted part of it. So this is a very interesting setup in Regeneron. INCY Pharmaceuticals, you can see here that there's a large accumulation type structure in INCY. The relative strength has built a big base and now is pushing up and out, making a higher high, completing a base, appears to want to emerge into leadership. Look at the nature of this rally up, and so far this rally is not returning back into this prior accumulation range, but seems to want to stay out here. It's got some work to do to get back up to the prior highs, but very interesting setup, especially going back just to 2018. And ILMN, this has certainly been one of the stronger names. Look at this accumulation here across this area. Big count build after a climax. Notice the backup is very shallow here after a good rally up to resistance and then a beautiful uptrend. New reaccumulation here with a shakeout. And the shakeout shows some weakness in the relative strength, but now the relative strength appears to want to get into an uptrend. So this is very interesting, and it's back up to the resistance area. And so we will watch this closely to see whether or not it can hold these gains that it's made up to resistance, which could show that a deep spring or shakeout is complete. Phase D rally. This is all potential accumulation for a larger count upwards. And then let's just briefly do one more. So this is really sort of how I look at these as I look at this longer term chart, these chart studies. I look for causes. So here you can see a very sharp break in BMRN. Climactic low, test the low here, important test. This is like a creek, a really good rally, but then a deep reaction into a last point of support while a really good rally has gone up to the resistance area. Let's see whether or not it can hold this. Relative strength is emerging into a leadership position. Okay, so with that, let's pause and get to looking at the cues. Oh, I apologize. There's one more stock that I think is very interesting, and this is Seattle Genetics. Here, this is best of breed potentially. Notice the reaccumulation structure after a climax goes into a range bound condition, up thrusts here, backs up, and then this is like a creek. Look at how shallow this is as it tries to consolidate on the long-term moving average. And this is like an extended backup, really 6 months or more, and then asserts itself into a beautiful uptrend. Look at the relative strength leadership, and it's now in what I consider to be a very good looking uptrend. This is like a very large base. Take the point and figure count of this area. This becomes a platform from which to launch a new uptrend. This uptrend hasn't been going for that long so far. There may be still good potential. I encourage you to go take a point and figure count of this area.